What if the version of humanity you were taught was never the beginning at all, but only the last surviving layer of a story built on ruins far older than memory? What if everything we call ancient is merely the echo of something that lived, thrived, and vanished long before the first city rose from mud and stone? Beneath our feet, beneath the oceans, beneath the polite certainty of textbooks, the earth keeps secrets older than language, secrets carved into drowned coastlines, burned into volcanic ash, whispered in myths that should not match across continents yet do. Imagine a world that flourished during a warm age when forests covered the Sahara, when Antarctica's shores were free of ice, when seas lay lower or higher by hundreds of feet, and entire civilizations could rise where only waves exist now. We walk across the silence of that world every day without knowing it. The ruins, if they still exist, are entombed under deserts, under oceans, under the weight of 97,000 years of forgetting. But fragments remain. Impossible dates, anomalous tools, submerged structures, myths recounting floods older than their storytellers, and memories carried not in stone, but in our own blood. Before we dive deeper, ignite that like button and prepare for the revelations to come. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, what time it is there, and as always with our videos, the visuals are here to add context, but they aren't necessary to follow along. Thank you for always having our back. Prepare yourself, and let's dive in. The story of humanity has always been presented as a slow ascent, a carefully layered staircase rising from primitive wanderers to the builders of cities. But when you follow the evidence scattered across continents, that staircase begins to crack. What emerges instead is a world that seems to have forgotten itself over and over again, losing entire epochs to fire, flood, and silence. Archaeology tells us that most of human history was erased not by war or kings, but by the earth itself, by the tilt of its axis, the movement of its seas, the breathing of its crust. These shifts didn't just reshape landscapes, they swallowed civilizations whole, grinding their stories into sediment until only fragments remained. A worked stone in impossible strata, a set of alignments carved into bedrock long before agriculture, a flooded plain where cities might once have stood. And when you start pulling on one fragment, another appears, and then another, until the accepted origin story begins to unravel like old fabric left too long in the sun. During the last interglacial period, roughly between 130,000 and 70,000 years ago, the world was a different place, warmer, wetter, more hospitable than the ice-choked millennia that followed. Forests stretched across now barren deserts, coastlines extended miles inland or retreated deep into basins depending on the sway of climate cycles. Only in the past century have scientists begun piecing together this earlier Earth, one that was not frozen and hostile, but fertile and alive. In this forgotten era, massive grasslands covered what is now the Sahara. Lakes larger than modern seas shimmered across the African interior. Rivers cut through regions now dried into dust. The first hints of systematic human occupation appear in the form of hearths, pigments, shaped stone, and evidence of long-term dwelling, far earlier than any timeline suggests civilization should exist. These were not the chaotic camps of wandering bands. They were settled spaces, ordered spaces, the beginnings of culture. In Jericho, a site typically framed within early biblical history, deeper layers reveal foundations from 10,000 BCE, already shockingly old by conventional standards. But even this is young compared to the anomalies that appear across the Levant, where certain flint tools and stone structures suggest earlier phases of organized living. The deeper archaeologists dig, the older the signs of stability become. And each discovery pushes back the boundary of when humans first began building, observing, solving, gathering, behaviors associated with civilization. The traditional model insists that writing, agriculture, and complex architecture emerged only after the last ice age. Yet evidence from Göbekli Tepe, dated to roughly 11,500 years ago, shows structures so sophisticated, massive pillars arranged with astronomical precision, that they cannot be the first attempt. No culture invents megalithic architecture at its beginning. It inherits it. But what could they have inherited from? That question becomes harder to dismiss when you look at the anomalies underwater. At the edge of the Gulf of Cambay, off India's western coast, sonar scans in 2001 revealed geometric patterns arranged along a stretch of seabed nearly 5 miles long. Right angles, long parallel lines, repeating rectilinear foundations, these shapes do not emerge accidentally from natural currents. They resemble avenues, courtyards, grids, the bones of a drowned city. When dredging operations recovered pottery fragments, stone tools, and fossilized wood, the debate ignited. Carbon dating showed ages around 9,000 years, but sediment layers suggested the structures might rest on far older ground, perhaps 30,000 years or more. If true, the implications would be enormous. It would mean complex urban organization existed long before the Indus Valley civilization, long before Sumer, long before Egypt, even long before the supposed birth of settled life. Skeptics argue erosion or natural formations, but the precision of the lines refuses to disappear. To the east, the Yonaguni Monument near Japan looms underwater like a silent testament to something lost. Massive terraces descend into the dark, with what look like staircases, platforms, and corridors carved directly into sandstone. Some geologists insist natural fracturing of rock can create straight edges, but the monument's symmetry suggests a guiding hand. Divers studying the structure have mapped flat planes meeting at exact angles, channels that resemble walkways, and stone features aligned with cardinal directions. The problem is not that nature cannot shape rock, it certainly can, but that nature rarely creates arrangements so eerily reminiscent of architecture. Whether intentionally carved or not, the Yonaguni Monument has become one of the central symbols of the theory that global coastlines once held civilizations erased by rising seas. More compelling still, these submerged anomalies appear in regions that would have been prime settlements during the warm interglacial age, exactly when a hypothesized ancient society might have flourished. When the last ice age ended around 12,000 years ago, sea levels rose more than 400 feet. Entire continental shelves vanished beneath water. If a civilization had lived along those ancient coasts, its cities would now sleep under hundreds of feet of ocean, covered in sediment and coral. Sonar only captures broad shapes. Fine details like carvings, hearths, and symbols remain invisible at such depths. That means the majority of whatever exists down there remains beyond reach, and each passing century deepens the ocean's grip. Coral grows over stones, silt buries lines, currents distort the seafloor. The sea is an artist whose brushstroke is obliteration. Some researchers argue that the oldest traces of true civilization may lie precisely where we cannot easily explore: the drowned plains around Southeast Asia. The Sunda Shelf, once a vast subcontinent connecting Indonesia, Malaysia, and parts of the Philippines, sank beneath the sea after the last glacial maximum. Before that, it hosted fertile river valleys, wide grasslands, and perhaps human communities more advanced than accepted history allows. Tool industries discovered along the edges of the submerged plateau show sophistication inconsistent with mobile hunter-gatherers. In certain regions, radiocarbon dates imply human occupation stretching back beyond 60,000 years. Mythologies from Southeast Asia to Polynesia speak of lands swallowed by rising waters, of migrations sparked by disappearing coastlines, of ancestors fleeing sinking horizons. These myths could be memories, preserved over tens of thousands of years, of a real drowning world. To understand how such memories persist, one must recognize that ancient storytelling was not entertainment, it was instruction. Myths encoded survival strategies, astronomical knowledge, maps of seasonal change. In Australia, Aboriginal oral traditions describe shorelines as they existed 70,000 years ago, details confirmed only recently by geological reconstruction. If these stories can carry across that much time, then tales of an even earlier flood, predating the one remembered by Sumer or Egypt, might indeed reflect real events around the last interglacial collapse. And if those stories point to the existence of older cultures, then humanity's collective memory is not a straight line, but a spiral, repeating injuries across ages. The Earth itself hints at this forgotten cycle. Off the coast of Cuba, in waters nearly 2,000 feet deep, sonar images captured massive stone blocks arranged in grid-like formations, some appearing pyramid-shaped. Though heavily debated, the idea that such structures lie underwater at such depth forces a question. How old must they be? Even conservative models of sea level rise suggest that any structure now sitting 2,000 feet below the surface would predate any known civilization by tens of thousands of years. Mainstream archaeology dismisses the find as misinterpreted sonar, but the echoes of pattern remain. The same kind of pattern appears in India, Japan, Southeast Asia, and the Caribbean. Geometric shapes in places that were once dry land during the warm periods long before the last ice age. If the anomalies were isolated, it would be easy to ignore them. But they stretch across continents like faint fingerprints left by a vanished people. They appear in regions that were all coastal lowlands during the interglacial warmth. They align with river systems long buried, mountains long eroded, and coastlines long drowned. No one claims these discoveries prove the existence of an ancient global civilization, but they do prove that ancient humans lived in places we have never studied, built in regions we cannot currently reach, and endured cycles of destruction far more dramatic than anything in recorded history. And if they lived long enough to build, they lived long enough to forget. Even on land, far from seas and erosion, traces emerge that challenge the narrative. In southern Africa, iron mines at Ngwenya reveal controlled extraction dating back more than 43,000 years. These mines required planning, resource management, and mastery of fire. Whether the purpose was symbolic or industrial remains unknown, but the organized nature of the site suggests a cultural sophistication rarely attributed to people of that era. In India's Narmada Valley, Hundreds of stone tools with precise manufacturing consistency lie beneath volcanic ash layers more than 70,000 years old. These tools were not scattered or random. They were standardized, as if created for large-scale distribution. Such organization demands more than imagination. It demands structure. And structure appears in other forms, too. In the South China Sea, research vessels have mapped buried river channels and drowned valleys that once formed a vast landscape ideal for human life. These regions now lie beneath turbulent waters, but sonar reveals shapes inconsistent with natural seafloor: rectilinear walls, terraces, and what appear to be plazas overgrown by coral. If these are indeed the relics of human occupation, then humanity's earliest cities might lie hidden beneath layers of ocean that no diver can safely reach. All these discoveries converge on one truth: humanity is older, more complex, and more fractured by catastrophe than our comfortable timeline suggests. The story of civilization is not a story of slow upward climb. It is a story of ascent, destruction, forgetting, and return. Humanity is not new. Humanity is a survivor. And the world we know is only the latest attempt to rebuild from a past that refuses to stay buried. The evidence, fragmented, controversial, imperfect, forms a mosaic of possibility. A shard from the seabed, a line in stone, a myth whose details should not exist, a pattern of settlement where no settlement should be. The more we examine the edges of accepted history, the more a silhouette begins to form. Not a kingdom, not an empire, but a civilization old enough to drown, to crumble, to vanish under 97,000 years of shifting earth and rising seas. A civilization whose memory lingers only in anomalies, in half-buried architecture, in myths spoken by people who never met, across oceans they were not supposed to cross. This is the frontier where archaeology meets legend, where sediment meets story, where science confronts the possibility that our species has lived through more cycles than we can count. And if that is true, then the ruins of the first age of humanity are not lost. They are simply waiting. Beneath the dunes, beneath the silt, beneath the waves that swallowed them whole, the deep past remains alive, whispering to anyone willing to listen. Long before humanity built the first walls of mud brick or carved its first symbols into stone, the earth itself was already shaping the fate of civilizations. Civilizations that may have risen and fallen long before the oldest ruins we can touch today. To understand how a world can disappear so completely that even its memory dissolves, you must look not at what humans built, but at what the planet destroyed. Fire, ice, ocean, and time are not gentle editors. They do not preserve chapters. They erase entire books. And in the silence left behind, all that remains are fragments, heat-scorched minerals, soot patterns in caves, pigments older than recorded myth, and tools crafted with a precision that should not exist in the deep abyss of prehistory. Fire is often seen as the first great invention of mankind, the spark that separated Homo sapiens from every creature that walked or crawled before them. But the deeper researchers look into ancient caves, mines, and forgotten landscapes, the more fire appears not as a discovery, but as a discipline, something mastered long before accepted timelines allow. In the hills of Swaziland, the Ngwenya mine presents one of the strangest puzzles in archaeology. Charcoal remnants discovered in its tunnels suggest human activity dating back more than 43,000 years, but geological layers hint at even deeper origins, perhaps 70,000 or more. What makes the site remarkable is not merely its age, but its sophistication. Evidence shows that ancient miners heated hematite ore with controlled flames to make extraction easier, a process that requires understanding how heat transforms matter. It is one thing to strike sparks. It is another to engineer fire into a tool. Across the deserts of Egypt, another mystery glitters beneath the sand. Libyan desert glass, translucent yellow fragments scattered over vast distances, was formed by temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Celsius, hotter than volcanic lava. Mainstream explanations propose a meteor airburst millions of years ago, a cosmic flash that fused silica into glass. But the presence of this rare material in artifacts like Tutankhamun's pectoral raises difficult questions. Did humans merely collect what nature produced, or had they rediscovered, at some unknown moment in deep time, a method of generating intense heat? If a forgotten culture once manipulated fire in ways we no longer understand, its furnaces, kilns, and workshops would have crumbled into nothingness tens of thousands of years ago. Only slag, the hardened residue of smelting, could survive. And indeed, in parts of sub-Saharan Africa and India, blackened stones with slag-like textures emerge from layers older than human agriculture. On the other side of the world, deep caves in Australia preserve hearths so ancient they stretch back more than 65,000 years. Scientists examining these sites found that early Aboriginal groups maintained fires in the same spots for thousands of years, a level of consistency and cultural continuity that contradicts the stereotype of nomadic, rootless wanderers. A hearth is a home. A hearth rebuilt on the same footprint, again and again, is a legacy. It means knowledge was taught, kept, and passed down. These ancient fires were not simply for warmth or cooking. They marked tradition, ritual, memory. Fire, in the deep past, was far more than a source of heat. It was a device for shaping stone, hardening wood, altering mineral bonds, and transforming the environment. In northern Australia and parts of Africa, evidence shows that early humans practiced controlled burning, fire stick farming, to encourage certain plants to grow and attract grazing animals. This was not agriculture, as textbooks define it, but it was environmental engineering, a system of land management long before plows, seeds, and irrigation. Some layers of charred soil suggest these practices date back nearly 100,000 years. If true, then humanity was shaping its world in organized ways long before the agricultural revolution ever began, long before we were supposed to be capable of anything more than survival. Even the caves of Europe hold secrets in soot. At sites like Kesem Cave in Israel and several deep cave systems in France and Spain, archaeologists have discovered burn patterns on ceilings and walls that indicate the use of animal fat as a light source, a more efficient and long-lasting illumination than wood alone. The people who tended those flames were not stumbling in darkness. They engineered light itself, creating bright, controlled fire that illuminated artwork, tools, gatherings, and rituals. Long after those flames went out, the soot remained, like fingerprints of forgotten lives. But the greatest mystery connected to fire is not found in caves or mines. It is found in the ruins of ancient cities built thousands of years after these early flames, where the knowledge of metallurgy, architecture, and geometry appears suddenly, without a clear path of development. Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, each civilization emerges with technologies too advanced to be first attempts. Somewhere in the shadows of deep time, humanity learned, forgot, and relearned. And the spark of that forgotten knowledge might lie in a catastrophe that nearly ended the species. 74,000 years ago, Mount Toba erupted with a force unlike anything in our world today. The explosion ejected thousands of cubic kilometers of ash into the atmosphere, blotting out the sun and plunging the Earth into a volcanic winter. Temperatures fell globally. Ecosystems collapsed. The human population shrank to a genetic bottleneck of perhaps only a few thousand individuals. If an early civilization existed during the warm interglacial age before this event, the Toba eruption would have erased it completely. Cities burned, knowledge wiped out, survivors reduced to fragments of memory and oral tradition. Only artifacts buried deep enough in the earth or submerged in sediment-rich waters could endure. In India's central Narmada Valley, archaeologists discovered stone tools buried beneath ash deposits directly linked to the Toba eruption. These tools were not crude flakes. They were standardized, symmetrical, produced in large quantities. The level of organization required to create such uniformity suggests something beyond random survival groups. These were tools for trade, distribution, and planning. Tools of a society, not of mere individuals. Far to the north, in Jordan's Black Desert, ancient geoglyphs known as kites spread across the landscape, massive geometric patterns of stone walls visible only from above. They were built for large-scale hunting or social gatherings, but their size implies cooperation among hundreds of people. Dating suggests they are nearly 9,000 years old, yet similar stone structures in Arabia appear older still. Could these have been the re-emergence of an architectural tradition preserved from a time before Toba? No one knows. But the pattern of geometry, planning, and alignment is unmistakable. The thread runs deeper. Across Siberia, colossal granite blocks at Mount Shoria rise like the shattered skeleton of a forgotten fortress. Some of these stones weigh hundreds of tons, far beyond the lifting capability of most prehistoric cultures. The blocks appear stacked, aligned, and weathered as if they once formed towering walls. Critics argue natural formation. Supporters see intention. And the question remains hanging in the cold air. Who could have shaped such massive stones in an age when humans were supposedly nomads? Far across the ocean, in the Andes of Bolivia, the ruins of Puma Punku present a similar enigma. The stone blocks here are cut with such precision that even modern tools would struggle to replicate the crisp angles and interlocking joints. Some blocks have channels and cavities so cleanly carved they resemble machined stone. The official datum places Puma Punku within the Tiwanaku civilization, around 1,500 years ago. But many blocks appear to have been reworked from older ruins, bearing erosion patterns inconsistent with the local climate. It is as if the builders inherited the remnants of something far older, something they themselves did not fully understand. Patterns like these, precision stones, astronomical alignments, unexplained ages, appear all over the world. In Africa's Mpumalanga region, a circular stone formation known as Adam's calendar aligns with solstices and equinoxes. Some researchers argue it is only a few thousand years old. Others, using erosion models and astronomical alignments, propose an age of 75,000 years. If true, it would be the oldest known megalithic calendar on Earth. A structure built by people who understood the motion of the heavens long before they were supposed to know anything at all. Astronomy appears again and again in mysterious places. At Nabta Playa in Egypt, stones arranged more than 7,000 years ago mark the rising of Sirius and Orion's belt. In South America, the ancient city of Tiwanaku aligns precisely with the Tropic of Capricorn. Across the world, you find cultures aligning temples, tombs, and monuments with solstices, equinoxes, and star cycles. This is not coincidence. It suggests a shared inheritance, a knowledge system old enough to echo across continents long before we believe global communication existed. Some call this diffusion, others call it parallel evolution. But when you trace the alignments across continents, they form a pattern too broad to be random. Ancient people, separated by oceans, seemed to share an obsession with the same constellations, the same angles, the same celestial markers. It is as if they were all rebuilding from the same blueprint, a blueprint remembered imperfectly from a world already lost. This brings us to one of the most compelling ideas whispered by archaeologists who work outside the boundaries of strict orthodoxy. The possibility that ancient humans were far more connected than the mainstream timeline admits. Evidence from islands across Southeast Asia shows that early Homo sapiens crossed open ocean channels more than 100,000 years ago, a staggering feat for supposed hunter-gatherers. The tools found on Crete, dated to over 130,000 years old, imply watercraft capable of navigating long distances. If humans sailed in that age, then the idea of coastal civilizations connected by maritime routes becomes far less fantastical. Coastlines during the interglacial period were not where they are today. Entire continents stretched wider. Islands we now see as small outcrops were once part of sprawling archipelagos. A civilization built along those shores could have traded, communicated, shared knowledge, and spread stories across regions that are now separated by deep ocean. When the ice returned and the seas fell, those coastlines expanded. When the ice melted again, they were swallowed. What remains of them sleeps under hundreds of feet of water, unreachable, unknowable. And yet the memory of those places may survive, not in stone, but in myth. Cultures around the world speak of a time when the gods walked among humans, when knowledge was given from the sky, from the sea, from a vanished land destroyed by flood or fire. In Sumer, the Apkallu descended to teach civilization after a great disaster. In Egypt, the Netters brought order and architecture. In Polynesia, culture heroes sailed from sinking islands to teach navigation to new communities. These stories share motifs too specific to be coincidence: a lost homeland, a catastrophic event, survivors carrying knowledge to a new world. Whether these myths reflect literal events or symbolic truths does not change their significance. They may preserve memories of people who lived through the destruction of a real world. An ancient civilization wiped clean around 97,000 years ago, during a time of shifting climates, melting ice, rising seas, and massive geological upheaval. Fire, stone, myth, and water all point to the same tantalizing possibility. Humanity is older and more complex than the version we have been taught. We are not the first humans to understand the sky. We are not the first to measure time. We are not the first to build with stone, shape fire, or cross oceans. we are simply the latest, and the ruins of the first may lie beneath oceans, deserts, volcanoes, and mountains, buried so deeply that only fragments whisper their truth. This is the quiet hum beneath archaeology, the murmur in the bones of the earth. It says, "You have forgotten." And forgetting is what allows the story to begin again. Humanity's memory is not written only in stone or myth. It is also written in blood, in the spiraling script of DNA that carries echoes of every ancestor who ever lived, including those whose faces we will never see, whose cities have turned to dust, whose entire civilizations vanished before the first recorded word. If stones can lie or erode, DNA remembers. It is the oldest living archive on Earth, a biological library that documents migrations, extinctions, encounters, and even exchanges between species we once believed had nothing to do with one another. When scientists first began to unravel this molecular record, they expected a neat, linear family tree. What they found instead was a tangle. Branches broken and reattached, strangers woven into the lineage of modern humans, signals of populations that vanished yet live on in us in ways we cannot fully understand. The more deeply they sequenced the genome, the louder the questions became. Were we truly alone in the ancient world? Or did humans once walk among other beings who might have contributed not only their genes, but their knowledge? For most of the 20th century, the story of human evolution was presented as a straightforward ascent. Homo sapiens emerged roughly 200,000 years ago, spread out of Africa around 70,000 years ago, and replaced other hominins, Neanderthals and Denisovans, through superiority or sheer numbers. It was clean, elegant, and reassuring. But as genetic technology advanced, the simplicity collapsed. Within the genome of nearly every living person outside Africa, scientists found traces of Neanderthal DNA, fragments from ancestors who clearly interbred with Homo sapiens instead of being replaced. In Southeast Asia and Oceania, another mystery appeared. Denisovan DNA, up to 5% of the genetic makeup in some populations. Yet Denisovans themselves left almost nothing behind. A tooth, a finger bone, a few genetic residues in the dust of a Siberian cave. The people were real. Their bodies are gone. Their culture, whatever it was, remains invisible. Even more unsettling are the ghost lineages, traces of ancient humans for whom no fossils exist at all. People we never knew existed until their DNA resurfaced like whispers in the blood of modern groups. In West Africa, certain populations carry up to 19% of their genome from an unknown archaic hominin, a being neither Neanderthal nor Denisovan nor Homo sapiens. This mysterious population branched off hundreds of thousands of years ago and lived alongside modern humans long enough to interbreed, leaving behind a genetic signature without a single bone to confirm its existence. The presence of these ghost people forces a profound question. How many human species lived on Earth at the same time? And what kinds of cultures did they create? When you consider that modern humans interbred with other lineages, the possibility emerges that these encounters were not random. They might have been exchanges of ritual, tools, knowledge, songs, stories, genes. It is possible that advanced symbolic thinking did not originate in one place, but was shared among multiple human groups. Some researchers even propose that early Homo sapiens inherited certain cognitive advantages from encounters with these older populations, including adaptations for survival, resistance to disease, and perhaps even traits linked to creativity or complex problem-solving. This theory gains weight when considering the microcephalin D allele, a genetic variant associated with brain development that appeared suddenly around 37,000 years ago and spread across Eurasia with astonishing speed. Some scientists have suggested it entered Homo sapiens through interbreeding with an unknown archaic population. If true, modern human intelligence is not a singular evolution, but a mosaic assembled from multiple ancestors, a collective inheritance, not a lone spark. Then there is the puzzle uncovered in 2013, when DNA from a 45,000-year-old femur found in Siberia revealed that modern humans must have interbred with Neanderthals far earlier than previously believed, perhaps 80,000 to 100,000 years ago. This directly contradicts the idea that humans only left Africa in large numbers around 70,000 years ago. It implies earlier migrations, earlier meetings, earlier cultural exchanges, and if humans ventured outward more than 100,000 years ago, it becomes nearly impossible to dismiss the idea that some of them established settlements, communities, or even civilizations in regions now erased by ice, fire, or rising seas. Genetic drift and diversity patterns tell a story far richer than archaeology alone. Maternal haplogroup L3, the ancestor of all non-African lineages, likely emerged between 70,000 and 90,000 years ago, but its sub-branches, M and N, diverged in ways that imply older populations were already living in Arabia and perhaps even India before the supposed Great Migration. These early settlers might have built structures that are now buried beneath coastal waters. They might have shaped tools that now lie beneath volcanic deposits. They might have carried myth and memory into the deep past. In caves from Spain to Borneo, symbolic behavior appears in bursts that seem too synchronized to be coincidence. Shell beads, ochre pigments, hand stencils, and engraved lines emerge across continents around the same periods. This could mean that symbolic culture began independently, but it could also mean selective preservation, or the influence of a cultural ancestor so ancient its name is lost. If there was a civilization nearly 97,000 years ago, its traditions might echo in these artifacts, reflected faintly like starlight from a vanished sun. But perhaps the most haunting genetic discovery concerns the Denisovans. Their DNA lives on strongly in certain modern populations, yet they left almost no physical evidence. They were clearly intelligent, capable, adaptive. They survived in challenging environments, including high-altitude plateaus that would kill unacclimated humans. Tibetans today possess a gene variant, EPAS1, derived directly from Denisovan ancestry. This adaptation allows them to use oxygen more efficiently at extreme elevations, a trait essential for life in the Himalayas. What does it mean that an extinct population held genetic solutions for environments Homo sapiens struggled to endure? What else might they have known? In Southeast Asia, Denisovan DNA appears in patterns that suggest multiple interactions with modern humans, not a single meeting. At the same time, the region hosts some of the world's oldest cave art, with pigment layers dating back over 40,000 years. Were these expressions purely Homo sapiens creations? Or could they reflect shared artistic traditions from a hybrid world where multiple human species coexisted? Such questions deepen when considering ancient populations in Melanesia and Australia, whose genetic lineages diverged from the rest of humanity tens of thousands of years ago. These groups carry some of the highest proportions of Denisovan DNA, and their cultural traditions include some of the most ancient oral histories on Earth. Stories of creation, fire theft, celestial beings, and cosmic cycles stretch across thousands of years. Some of these stories contain details about coastlines and floods that match geological changes occurring up to 70,000 years ago. Oral traditions that challenge every assumption about the fragility of memory. DNA is not just a record of ancestry. It can also reveal population collapse, migration, adaptation, and survival strategies. Genetic bottlenecks, like the one associated with the Toba eruption, show humanity shrinking to a fraction of its numbers, a perfect moment for a civilization to vanish without trace. Yet bottlenecks also show rapid recovery afterward, suggesting survivors regrouped, reorganized, and carried fragments of culture forward. Imagine a world where only a few thousand people remain. Those who survive rebuild life with shattered memory. Their myths become metaphors, their knowledge fragments into ritual and superstition. Their stories warp with time, turning astronomical observations into gods, environmental disasters into divine punishment, and cultural heroes into supernatural beings. When the population grows again, these stories take root and spread, forming the foundations of future civilizations, future priests, future astronomers, future builders. And behind every myth lies the ghost of a real world destroyed, the cave where Denisovans, Neanderthals, and modern humans overlapped is perhaps the clearest symbol of this shared inheritance. Denisova Cave contains layered deposits showing multiple populations dwelling in the same fire-lit chambers across thousands of years. Their soot, tools, bones, and DNA all mingle in the sediment. Perhaps they spoke to one another. Perhaps they learned from one another. Perhaps they shared rituals and stories around the same flames. Civilization may not have begun with one species or one group, but with the blending of many. A mosaic society, not a singular origin. Some anthropologists believe that language itself may have emerged from such interspecies interactions. The human FOXP2 gene, linked to speech and linguistic complexity, underwent a significant mutation sometime before 100,000 years ago. Its spread suggests strong selection pressure, possibly due to interactions between populations with differing communication abilities. Language might not have evolved in isolation. It might have been shaped through exchange. As scientists map these genetic mysteries, new fragments continue to surface. A child found in Denisova Cave was discovered to have a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father, proof that interbreeding was not accidental but common enough to leave direct hybrids. These hybrids were not anomalies. They were the norm in some regions. They walked the same valleys, climbed the same mountains, and perhaps built structures together. This mingling may have created hybrid cultures, cultures that left no stone architecture, no written records, no metal artifacts, yet preserved their wisdom through memory and blood. When later civilizations emerged, Sumer, India, Egypt, China, they may have inherited mental frameworks, cosmological ideas, or patterns of thought shaped by ancestors who lived tens of thousands of years earlier. Modern physiology carries these echoes. Immune system defenses against ancient pathogens trace back to Neanderthal ancestry in Europeans and Asians. Genetic resistance to altitude comes from Denisovans. Even certain behavioral tendencies and neurological traits may reflect blending from long-extinct populations. These are not minor details. They are evolutionary gifts from civilizations and cultures that the Earth has erased. If a civilization existed 97,000 years ago, its people may still be with us, not physically, but genetically, in the way we think, in the way we survive, in the way we imagine the heavens and tell stories about the origins of life and fire, in dreams, in rituals, in symbols whose first creators are long gone. DNA is an unbroken chain reaching into a time without writing, without cities, without record. Its whispers are faint but persistent. Ghost ancestors, lost peoples, civilizations erased so thoroughly by time and cataclysm that only their bloodlines survive. Perhaps the truth is this: humanity is not a story of one beginning, but a story of many beginnings layered on top of one another. Each rise followed by destruction, each destruction followed by rebirth, each rebirth carrying fragments of the world before it. We are the descendants of survivors, survivors not only of ice and fire, but of forgotten ages. Their knowledge is inside us, their fears, their creativity, their resilience, their memory. We are, in a profound and literal way, the children of lost civilizations. Long before compasses, sextants, or satellites, long before sailcloth snapped in the wind above Phoenician ships or Greek galleys, someone, somewhere, may have mapped a world no one now remembers. Long before history claims humanity learned geometry, astronomy, or the art of navigation, scattered artifacts hint at minds capable of charting coasts, measuring angles, and understanding the Earth as a sphere rather than a flat expanse. Scholars once dismissed these anomalies as copying errors, coincidences, misinterpretations. But as the fragments accumulate across libraries, seabeds, and mountain temples, the possibility grows that humanity inherited its earliest geographic knowledge not out of thin air, but from an older world washed away by time, thousands of years before modern science revealed Antarctica's true, ice-free coastline. The Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral, depicts a southern continent with uncanny accuracy. The admiral himself claimed he compiled it from older sources, some said to date back to the time of Alexander, others of unknown origin. The precision of the southern landmass would be impossible for any 16th-century cartographer without surveying technologies we take for granted today. Modern scientists needed seismic data and satellite imaging to reconstruct Antarctica's subglacial shape. Yet there it sits, on a parchment centuries old, drawn with a confidence that suggests knowledge from a time when the ice sheets were different, when the world looked different. The suggestion is unsettling, that the mapmaker's sources might have been copies of copies passed down from a civilization that stood long before the last glacial advance, long before the seas changed, long before memory fractured. The Piri Reis map is not alone. The Orontius Phineus map of 1531 shows rivers and mountains in Antarctica that align strikingly with subglacial features known today. The Boitier map of 1737 depicts a partially ice-free Antarctica with inland seas and channels corresponding to modern topographical reconstructions. None of these mapmakers had access to the technology that would make such accuracy possible. The idea that these maps were based on lost ancient charts, documents created when Antarctica was partially ice-free during the last interglacial period, has become one of the most persistent whispers in alternative archaeology. If true, it implies cartographers alive nearly 100,000 years ago might have surveyed coastlines now buried under miles of ice. Mainstream historians countered that these ancient-looking southern continents are misinterpretations, fanciful additions, artistic embellishments. But the repetitive precision across multiple maps, created centuries apart with no collaboration, suggests otherwise. The southern lands share not only shape, but proportions, angle, and geographic relationship to other continents. Coincidence may explain one anomaly. It cannot explain three, each echoing the same impossible knowledge. Advanced cartography demands more than a curious mind. To draw accurate coastlines or project the curvature of the Earth, a culture must travel long distances, record latitudes, measure time, and understand the relationship between celestial bodies and the horizon. It requires astronomy, mathematics, shipbuilding, and the ability to preserve knowledge across generations. None of these should exist before the agricultural revolution. Yet the maps hint they may have been inherited from a forgotten era. When archaeologists study the oldest temples, pyramids, and megalithic sites, they encounter techniques too refined to be first attempts. The Great Pyramid's orientation to true north is off by less than 3 arc-minutes. The stones of Machu Picchu interlock with earthquake-resistant precision. The city of Caral in Peru, older than the pyramids of Egypt, features calculated geometry and ceremonial architecture that appears suddenly without developmental precursors. It is as if these cultures were remembering something, not inventing it. Geometry is not intuitive. The division of a circle into 360 degrees is not random. The Sumerian base 60 numbering system reflects astronomical cycles that require centuries of observation. Precession, the 26,000-year wobble of Earth's axis, cannot be discovered accidentally. It demands long-term skywatching across generations. Yet ancient cultures worldwide encoded precession into their myths, calendars, and sacred structures. The temples of Angkor in Cambodia align with star positions in the constellation Draco, as they appeared thousands of years before the temples were built. The pyramids of Giza align with Orion's belt in a configuration matching the sky around 10,500 BCE. Critics call these correlations speculative, yet the geometry is unmistakable. Ancient builders were not blind to the heavens. They incorporated vast cosmological cycles into stone, cycles far older than their own existence. If these civilizations did not independently develop such knowledge, then the logical alternative is inheritance, an intellectual legacy passed down from a people who lived through eras lost to catastrophe. A people who observed the sky when the stars were in different positions, long before the ice, long before rising seas drowned their world. During the last interglacial period, roughly between 130,000 and 70,000 years ago, the Earth was warmer and wetter. Coastlines extended differently, and entire regions now underwater were dry land. Many of these submerged plains would have been perfect for early human settlement, temperate, fertile, and interconnected. The Sunda Shelf of Southeast Asia formed a vast supercontinent where Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines now lie. The Persian Gulf Basin was a wide, lush valley fed by rivers. The continental shelves around India were dry plains with sprawling coastlines. If humans occupied these places, and evidence suggests they did, then their settlements are now buried beneath hundreds of feet of water. Sonar scans off the coast of India, Japan, and Cuba show geometric formations consistent with roads, foundations, and structures impossible to dismiss as random. the Gulf of Cambay alone reveals a grid-like pattern extending for miles. Excavations dredged up artifacts whose carbon dates stretch beyond the comfortable boundaries of accepted history. These artifacts may not be remnants of a technologically advanced society, but they are not the scatterings of aimless nomads either. They are deliberate, organized, and older than they should be. What makes these discoveries even more compelling is the global alignment of sacred sites along specific geodetic paths. A great circle drawn around the Earth passes through Easter Island, Machu Picchu, the Nazca Lines, Giza, Petra, Angkor Wat, and other ancient sites with architectural sophistication. The probability that these alignments occurred by chance is low, especially when these sites also share mathematical ratios related to Earth's circumference, the golden ratio, or astronomical cycles. It is as if ancient civilizations were aware not only of their local environments, but of the planet as a whole. This awareness lies at the core of geodetic theory. The idea that ancient builders possessed a unified understanding of Earth's dimensions and used it as a template for sacred architecture. The same proportional constants appear in both the Great Pyramid and the temples of Angkor. The same astronomical alignments appear in structures separated by oceans. These patterns may have arisen through cultural diffusion, or through what some scholars call geodetic memory. The tendency of cultures to unconsciously rebuild along ancient lines, using proportions and principles handed down symbolically rather than consciously. But what if the memory was not unconscious? What if early humans inherited not only stories and rituals from their ancestors, but measurements, star maps, and navigational lore from a people who understood the world far earlier than we believe? Consider the case of Crete. Stone tools found on the island date to more than 130,000 years ago. Reaching Crete requires crossing deep water channels. This discovery alone shatters the assumption that ancient humans lacked seaworthy vessels. If they sailed then, what else did they do? What else did they see? Consider the islands of Indonesia. Tools found on Sulawesi date to over 60,000 years ago, yet the island has been separated by ocean for even longer. This suggests repeated maritime crossings. If humans in these regions were capable of ocean travel, they might have charted coastlines, currents, and star paths. Their maps would not have survived, made of materials too fragile to endure. But their knowledge might have, preserved through oral tradition, ritual, and later, through simplified myth. Every culture on Earth contains a story of ancestors who came from across the sea. Polynesian navigators speak of lands swallowed by rising waters. Australian Aboriginal peoples preserve tales of coastlines that no longer exist. Even the ancient Egyptians spoke of Zep Tepi, the first time when gods arrived from a distant land to teach order and architecture. The Sumerians told of the Apkallu, sages who emerged from the sea after a great flood. These myths may not describe literal gods, but survivors from a civilization destroyed by sea level rise, bringing fragments of lost knowledge into a world struggling to rebuild. If such a civilization existed 97,000 years ago, its people would have watched the skies from coastlines now submerged. They would have seen star alignments different from those recorded by later cultures. They might have noted precessional shifts, observed the long rhythm of Earth's wobble, and integrated these cycles into sacred calendars. If these people built temples, they are now buried. If they engraved star maps, they lie beneath silt, coral, and darkness. Only the echoes remain, encoded in myths and stones placed millennia later by descendants who remembered without understanding. Across continents, scattered stone circles and ancient observatories track the motions of the sun, moon, and stars with precision. Many align with solstices and equinoxes. Some align with zenith points, eclipse cycles, or the rising of specific stars. What unites these sites is not their age, but their intention: to preserve cosmic patterns. These structures function as memory devices for a world already forgotten. Modern astronomy confirms that many ancient myths describe real celestial events. The precessional shift of Orion's belt is embedded in Egyptian symbolism. The Pleiades cluster appears in stories from Greece, Japan, and Polynesia with nearly identical meaning. Aboriginal Australian sky lore contains accurate descriptions of star patterns from tens of thousands of years ago. These parallels may reflect a shared ancestral cosmology, preserved through a time deeper than history. If ancient humans shared a unified understanding of the sky, it may have originated not independently but from an earlier global tradition, one scattered by catastrophe but preserved in fragments. When the survivors migrated inland after rising seas drowned their homes, they carried their star knowledge with them, embedding it in rituals, stories, and sacred architecture. Later, civilizations built upon these fragments, unaware they were polishing the remnants of a forgotten science. Humanity's earliest maps may not have been drawn on parchment or carved in stone. They might have been star maps, encoded in myth, aligned with temples, preserved through ritual. Every ancient culture claims the stars once guided their ancestors. Every early priesthood was astronomer first, theologian second. Every sacred story begins in the sky. Perhaps this is why the oldest traditions describe gods descending from the heavens. Perhaps they were not gods at all, but people whose knowledge seemed divine to a world rising from ruin. People who understood tides, seasons, cycles, and the shape of the earth. People who remembered a drowned world, who carried its maps not on papyrus but in their minds. The artifacts they left behind are scattered, distorted by time, reduced to anomalies that defy neat classification. But when you place these anomalies together, ancient maps, submerged cities, astronomical alignments, geometric temples, and enduring myths, a pattern emerges. A pattern suggesting that humanity has risen before, that global understanding existed before the flood, that a civilization nearly 97,000 years old may have once measured the world, mapped its coasts, watched its skies, and passed down knowledge that would one day re-emerge in the pyramids, in Stonehenge, in Angkor, in the great observatories of the Andes. We are not the beginning of civilization. We are the continuation of a story interrupted by ice, water, fire, and forgetting. And somewhere beneath the waves, beneath the deserts, beneath the glaciers, the first chapter still sleeps, waiting for the world to remember it again. When the last of the great glaciers began their long retreat and the world warmed into a new age, the earth did not simply thaw, it transformed. Forests migrated, rivers changed course, mountains shed their icy armor, and vast green plains turned into deserts under skies hotter than anything early humans had ever known. The Sahara, now a wasteland of sand and silence stretching across North Africa, was once a world of lakes, rivers, and grasslands, where animals roamed in herds so large they rivaled those of the modern Serengeti. But buried beneath its dunes lies a deeper mystery, one far older than the rise of Egypt or the birth of writing. For tens of thousands of years, perhaps even during the last interglacial period, nearly 120,000 to 80,000 years ago, people thrived on land where the sun now scorches the remnants of forgotten lakes. And scattered across the desert's hidden layers are the fingerprints of a civilization that should not exist. Satellite images reveal faint lines cutting across dunes, dry riverbeds flowing through regions untouched by humans for millennia. Radar penetrating deep into the sands uncovers entire networks of buried channels that once fed vast inland seas. The Green Sahara, as paleoclimatologists call it, was not a myth. It was a reality that repeated itself over cycles of climate change, stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. Each wet phase turned the desert into a cradle of life. Each dry phase erased what came before, but this cycle alone cannot explain the anomalies. At the center of these mysteries lies the Rishat structure of Mauritania, often called the Eye of the Sahara. From above, it appears as a colossal ringed formation resembling a target carved into the desert, nearly 40 kilometers across. Geologists classify it as an eroded dome of rock shaped by millions of years of uplift and weathering. But others see something different. Concentric rings of land surrounded by ancient river channels, their widths consistent with measurements described in the oldest legends. No one suggests the Eye is literally the lost city of Atlantis, yet the comparison reveals a deeper possibility, that circular city designs or cosmological patterns may have been inherited from an age when the Sahara was green. The Eye's outer ridges show signs of ancient water flow, not mere wind erosion. For a landform now isolated in desert silence, the evidence of past rivers is striking. Nearby, in the Adrar Plateau, archaeologists find artifacts that grow stranger the farther they dig. Stone tools, hearths, and carvings tens of thousands of years old lie among now fossilized lakebeds. These petroglyphs depict a world teeming with elephants, giraffes, hippos, crocodiles, creatures that need water, shade, and thriving vegetation. And among the images of animals are symbols whose meanings are lost. Spirals, concentric circles, outlines of structures that do not resemble simple huts or temporary shelters. These engravings are not random art. They show awareness, observation, and something more, an attempt to preserve memory. Even more astonishing are the rock carvings of the Tassili Najer Mountains in Algeria, massive murals spanning entire cliff faces painted and etched between 2,000 and 12,000 years ago. But beneath these well-documented layers lie older, more weathered carvings, difficult to date, yet stylistically distinct. Some researchers believe these deeper images may reach back far earlier, perhaps into the tens of thousands of years, possibly aligning with earlier Green Sahara phases. Among them appear figures with unusual proportions, adorned with intricate patterns, standing beside structures that look nothing like tents or temporary dwellings. They show what might be ceremonial scenes, astronomical motifs, and depictions of cattle long before domestication is believed to have begun. These images suggest a society with continuity, identity, and ritual. But the Sahara's mysteries do not end with rock art. Around its edges and buried beneath dunes are curious stone structures, some circular, others rectangular, arranged in patterns that hint at purpose rather than chance. Many resemble early forms of megalithic monuments, stone circles aligned with solstices, upright pillars marking celestial events. The sheer number of these structures across such an enormous region suggests widespread cultural practices. These were not the efforts of isolated tribes. They reflect a shared architectural language tied to astronomy and possibly to calendars tracking seasonal shifts. In the Tibesti Mountains of Chad and Libya, rock engravings show star-like forms and spiral symbols similar to those found across the globe, from New Mexico to Australia. Although not proof of contact, the similarities raise the question of whether ancient humans once shared a global symbolic vocabulary inherited from an earlier era. If so, the Sahara may have been one of the nodes in that ancient network, a place where knowledge flowed long before its sands swallowed it. On the Arabian Peninsula, one of the driest landscapes on Earth today, lies another key to this lost world. Paleoclimate studies reveal that Arabia was once home to enormous freshwater lakes during the same wet phases that turned the Sahara green. Around these vanished lakes, archaeologists have uncovered tools dating back over 80,000 years. Tools far more sophisticated than expected for their time. Among them are hand axes of exceptional symmetry, blades shaped with a delicacy akin to those found in much later cultures, and hearths built with deliberate placement and structure. These were not the casual remains of transient wanderers. They were the imprints of people who understood their environment and shaped it with intention. Satellite scans across northern Arabia reveal long, dark stone structures stretching for miles, kites, gates, triangles, and other geometric shapes visible only from above. Their scale is immense, some spanning hundreds of meters. Their purpose remains unknown. Hunting traps, ceremonial pathways, or astronomical markers. Some align with sunrise or sunset at equinox, others with the positions of bright stars. These stone lines resemble the geoglyphs of South America in their scope and organization. If they were built by people living tens of thousands of years ago, they challenge everything we believe about prehistoric mobility and cognition. These builders did not merely survive. They planned, engineered, and observed. As seas rose at the end of the last ice age, the once lush regions of Arabia and North Africa dried, and populations migrated. Some moved into the Nile Valley, contributing to what would become the foundations of ancient Egypt. Archaeological evidence shows striking continuities between early Nile cultures and those of the prehistoric Sahara. The worship of cattle, the use of circular structures, the emphasis on solar cycles. All may be echoes of much older traditions carried out of a dying landscape. Egypt's earliest mythologies speak of a time when the land was green and the gods walked among humans, teaching order and wisdom. These myths may not describe deities in the literal sense, but ancestors carrying fragments of a lost culture into a new world. Legends from the Berber peoples of North Africa also speak of ancient cities buried beneath the sand, their names forgotten, but their ruins occasionally glimpsed after storms peel away layers of dune. Stories tell of stone corridors, broken columns, and enormous foundations stretching across the desert floor. These tales persisted long before modern archaeology. While many are exaggerated or metaphorical, they might preserve memories of real places destroyed by desertification. For people watching their lakes dry and grasslands fade, the transformation would have felt apocalyptic, a slow-motion end of the world. Across Africa, the migration paths visible in genetic data reveal movements consistent with environmental collapse, As the Sahara dried, populations retreated toward river valleys, coasts, and mountainous regions where water persisted. Along these routes lie sites of ancient settlement, megalithic alignments in Mali, early stone industries in Ethiopia, and complex rock art clusters in Niger and Sudan. These connections imply a web of cultural exchange stretching across thousands of miles. If these people shared knowledge, stories, and symbols, then pieces of an earlier civilization may have spread far beyond the Sahara's borders. But perhaps the most profound evidence of memory survives not in stone, but in myth. Tales from West Africa describe a lost age when the world was green and humans built vast settlements. Some stories speak of a great drought that forced entire tribes to migrate east towards the Nile or south toward the forests. Others describe rivers that flowed where none exist today. Even more intriguing are the recurring themes of circular cities, sky-watching priests, and knowledge handed down from ancestors who lived before the desert came. These motifs mirror those in ancient Mesopotamia, India, and the Mediterranean, cultures separated by ocean and time. The universality of these stories suggests they may originate from a shared prehistoric memory. Yet myths are only one thread. Another thread lies beneath the deserts themselves. Ground-penetrating radar surveys show dense clusters of buried structures beneath dunes in regions where no modern settlement ever stood. Some are rectangular, some circular, some arranged in patterns too orderly to be natural. Many appear close to ancient riverbeds that dried over 8,000 years ago. Excavating these sites is nearly impossible due to the shifting sands, but the initial scans provide tantalizing glimpses of what might lie buried. Entire forgotten villages, maybe even early cities, preserved beneath layers of sand that have shielded them from erosion for thousands of years. The Sahara, for all its silence, is not a graveyard. It is a vault. Its dunes bury and protect just as they erase and consume. Beneath them might lie the ruins of the first experiments in architecture, agriculture, or astronomical observation. Perhaps even remnants of the civilization that flourished during the forgotten Warm Age nearly 97,000 years ago. If such a civilization existed, the Sahara would have been one of its centers, a green paradise filled with rivers and lakes, a crossroads connecting Africa, Arabia, and the Mediterranean. The transformation of this land into desert was not sudden. It occurred over thousands of years as monsoons shifted southward and rainfall diminished. For the people who lived through this transition, it must have felt like an ending too slow to escape, too vast to fight. They would have watched their rivers shrink, their cattle die, their fields crack in the heat. They would have migrated, carrying with them memories of a world that no longer existed. And in the places they settled, the Nile, the Levant, the Sahel, they would have built new cultures rooted in old traditions. Some of those traditions survived long enough to be recorded by later civilizations. Egyptian mythology, for example, remembers a time when the land was perfect, when the gods walked the earth, when the world was green and whole. The symbol of the sun crossing the sky, the emphasis on cyclical rebirth, the cosmic order known as Ma'at, all may reflect memories of an earlier world where environmental cycles shaped human life in profound ways. The earliest temples of Egypt align not only with the Nile, but with celestial formations, suggesting a culture already deeply attuned to cosmic rhythms. Such knowledge may have been carried from the Sahara, by people fleeing a drying world. In Greece, faint echoes appear in legends of Atlantis, a circular city destroyed by rising waters, a memory that may be distorted by time, but rooted in real events of desertification and flood. Plato's story was never meant as literal fact, but its symbolic structure mirrors the fate of cultures destroyed by environmental collapse. The idea of a concentric city also mirrors patterns seen in the Sahara's ancient carvings and stone layouts. In the end, the Sahara's greatest mystery is not the images carved on its cliffs or the structures buried beneath its dunes. It is the possibility that the desert itself is the tomb of history's first forgotten age, a place where humanity may have reached a level of organization, observation, and culture long before recorded time. Its rivers once nurtured not nomads, but communities. Its lakes once reflected not emptiness, but sky-watching astronomers and architects who aligned their lives to the rhythm of the cosmos. If the Sahara holds the ruins of a civilization lost to drought and time, then the world must rethink everything it believes about human origins. Perhaps the first great cities did not rise in Sumer or Egypt, but vanished beneath desert sands tens of thousands of years earlier. Perhaps the earliest astronomers watched the stars from Saharan plateaus now worn by wind. Perhaps the story of civilization did not begin with writing or agriculture, but with memory, a memory that has faded into myth. What remains today are clues scattered across a land that refuses to tell its story easily. Stone circles, buried rivers, petroglyphs, megaliths, tools carved from stone older than accepted timelines allow. 1,000 fragments pointing toward a single truth: that humanity has lived many lives, built many worlds, and forgotten more than it remembers. The Sahara does not speak in words. It speaks in absence, in silence, in the overwhelming weight of possibility. And somewhere beneath its endless dunes, the past waits, untouched, unseen, and unremembered, longing for its story to return to the light. Long before the Old Kingdom raised its first pyramid, before the first pharaoh carved his name into the desert stone, and long before the Nile became the spine of an empire that would shape world mythology, the land we now call Egypt was already ancient. Not ancient in the sense of crumbling temples or faded dynasties, but ancient in memory, in inheritance, in knowledge carried like embers through darkness by people who survived a world that collapsed long before the first hieroglyph was ever carved. Egypt did not invent civilization. Egypt inherited it, refined it, illuminated it, and enshrined it in stone so enduring that even time struggles to erase it. But to see the deeper story, you must go beyond the monuments, beneath the sand, behind the familiar narratives, and into the shadowed origins that whisper through Egypt's earliest myths and structures, origins that may reach back tens of thousands of years, into the forgotten ages when humanity lived through cycles of creation and destruction. The oldest Egyptian texts speak of a time before kings, before dynasties, before the Nile Valley became a kingdom. They call this era Zep Tepi, the first time. According to the tradition, Zep Tepi was an age when the gods themselves walked the earth, when they brought order from chaos, when they taught humans architecture, astronomy, and the principles of harmony. Scholars interpret these gods as metaphors, symbolic representations of natural forces or early priest kings. But the consistency of the narrative, the idea of a lost golden age, a time of knowledge inherited rather than invented, echoes myths from Sumer, India, Mesoamerica, and Polynesia. Everywhere, the oldest stories begin not with a rise, but with a return. Not with invention, but with restoration. If Zep Tepi corresponds not to literal deities, but to people, survivors from an advanced culture wiped out by catastrophe, then the earliest Egyptians did not start from nothing. They were rebuilding. Evidence for this lies not in myth alone, but in the architecture itself. The oldest stone structures in Egypt, such as the ARCHAEON at Abydos, demonstrate engineering sophistication unequaled in later periods. The ARCHAEON sits at a lower elevation than the surrounding temple complex, its gigantic granite blocks fitted with precision typically attributed to much later cultures. Some of these blocks weigh over 100 tons. The style is megalithic, monumental, and distinctly different from dynastic Egyptian architecture. The contrast is so stark that many archaeologists admit the ARCHAEON appears to have been built in an earlier age, later incorporated into newer temples. Even the Great Sphinx offers its own quiet defiance of the accepted timeline. Geological studies of the Sphinx enclosure reveal deep vertical erosional channels consistent with heavy rainfall, not wind. Yet the last time Egypt experienced sustained heavy rainfall was at the end of the Pleistocene, thousands of years before the pyramids. This suggests the Sphinx may have been carved not around 2500 BCE, but potentially 10,000 or even 12,000 years ago, during a wetter climatic period. If true, the Sphinx stands as a sentinel from a forgotten epoch, later adopted by dynastic Egyptians who maintained and restored it without understanding its true age. But the Sphinx is only one piece of a much larger, older puzzle. At the base of the Giza Plateau are the remains of structures whose massive limestone blocks bear erosion patterns far older than the pyramids themselves. These subterranean features, partially excavated and partially sealed by millennia of sand, hint that the plateau may have been a sacred site long before the first pharaoh. Ancient Egyptians themselves believed they were maintaining the traditions of a much older culture. The pyramid texts describe Zep Tepi as a time when the earth was reformed after a great catastrophe, when knowledge preserved by the gods was used to rebuild. Geologically, this catastrophe may correspond to the massive changes triggered by the end of the last ice age. Around 12,800 years ago, the Earth experienced a sudden cooling known as the Younger Dryas, possibly caused by a comet impact or rapid meltwater influx. Then, around 11,600 years ago, temperatures rebounded just as dramatically. This date, 11,600 years ago, is the exact time Plato assigns to the destruction of Atlantis. It also aligns with the period of major climate shifts across North Africa and the Middle East. For a people living at the edge of such upheaval, the transformation would have been catastrophic. Rising waters, collapsing ecosystems, shifting weather patterns, everything familiar would have vanished. Survivors might have migrated into more stable regions like the Nile Valley, carrying with them fragments of ancient knowledge. This migration may help explain why early Egyptian culture appears fully formed at its beginning. Writing, monumental architecture, and complex religious cosmology arise with startling suddenness. The earliest hieroglyphs show a level of symbolic sophistication inconsistent with a purely local invention. The orientation of temples and pyramids reveals deep astronomical understanding. Alignments with Orion's belt, Sirius, the solstices, and specific star risings. Such precision requires centuries of sky watching, yet Egypt's history does not show a gradual development of these practices. They appear suddenly, as if inherited. The mathematical relationships embedded in the Great Pyramid reinforce this idea. Its dimensions encode P, F, and ratios related to Earth's radius and circumference. Orthodox archaeology insists these correlations are coincidental, the accidental result of practical engineering. But the consistency of these ratios across multiple facets of the structure suggests intentionality, not accident. To build the Great Pyramid, the Egyptians needed knowledge of surveying, geometry, geodesy, and engineering at levels not seen again until much later civilizations. Why did such knowledge emerge so abruptly? If Egypt inherited its scientific foundation from an older world, the Nile Valley may have become a refuge for the survivors of a civilization lost to rising seas or desertification. Consider the possibility of a network of prehistoric cultures stretching from the Sahara to the Levant, from the Red Sea to the Arabian Peninsula, a network disrupted by environmental collapse. As people migrated inward, the Nile's predictable flooding provided stability. Egypt became a sanctuary where ancient knowledge could be preserved through institutions like the priesthoods of Heliopolis and Hermopolis, which maintained astronomical records longer than any other culture. The ancient Egyptians referred to their earliest priests and teachers as Shemsu-Hor, the followers of Horus. Some inscriptions assign impossibly long reigns to the early kings, spanning thousands of years. Scholars interpret these as symbolic, but they could reflect distorted memories of generations carrying an ancient legacy across turbulent ages. The Shemsu-Hor were said to have possessed knowledge of the stars, the earth, and the cycles of time. They maintained rituals older than writing. Could they have been descendants of an older people? Beyond Egypt's borders, the Levant and Mesopotamia show similar patterns. At Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, structures dating to 11,500 years ago display architectural sophistication that should not exist so early in human history. T-shaped pillars weighing tons are arranged in circles with carvings depicting animals, symbols, and abstract motifs. The site's builders clearly possessed organized religion, engineering capability, and astronomical knowledge. Yet they predate agriculture, pottery, and settled life. Some researchers propose that Göbekli Tepe was constructed by survivors of a lost civilization, gathering in the aftermath of cataclysm to preserve their knowledge in stone. Connecting Göbekli Tepe to early Egypt is speculative but possible. Trade routes may have linked the Nile Valley to Anatolia even in remote prehistory. More importantly, symbolic parallels exist between the vulture, serpent, and bull motifs in both regions. These motifs may represent the remnants of a shared symbolic system older than either culture. If a civilization existed nearly 97,000 years ago, its symbolic language may have survived through oral tradition long after its cities vanished. Egypt's creation myths describe the world emerging from a primordial ocean. This ocean, called Nun, represents both chaos and memory, the infinite, timeless sea from which all creation springs. For a people whose ancestors fled rising waters, such imagery might reflect literal memory transformed into myth. The story of Atum creating the first land on a mound rising above the waters parallels flood myths from Mesopotamia, India, and Polynesia. Everywhere the story is the same: a world submerged, a remnant surviving, a new age beginning. The pyramids themselves may symbolize this cycle. Their shapes mirror the rays of the sun, a visual representation of ascension, rebirth, and cosmic order. But they also resemble mountains rising above floodwaters. Some texts describe them as islands of creation, stable points in a world of chaos. If the ancestors of the Egyptians survived a cataclysmic flood, the pyramid might represent both memory and promise, a reminder of endurance. The Sphinx, too, may symbolize this continuity. Its lion body represents strength and endurance, while its human face symbolizes wisdom. If it predates the pyramids by millennia, as geological evidence suggests, then it stands as a relic from the transitional age between destruction and rebirth, a guardian of memory, watching over a plateau that has been sacred for far longer than written history acknowledges. As Egypt developed into one of the world's first great civilizations, its people wove their ancestral memory into their culture. They did not speak of inventing knowledge. They spoke of recovering it. They attributed their wisdom to gods and mythical ancestors, not because they misunderstood history, but because the true origins lay so deep in the past that myth was the only language capable of holding it. Egypt's entire worldview revolves around cycles, of life and death, of river and desert, of stars rising and setting, of time repeating itself. This cyclical philosophy may reflect an ancient understanding that civilizations rise and fall in great arcs. The Egyptians saw themselves not at the beginning of history, but as participants in an eternal pattern. Their monuments, designed to last for eternity, reflect this belief. And yet, despite Egypt's achievements, the memory of Zep-Tepi remains elusive, fragmented, obscured by layers of interpretation. Perhaps this is inevitable. A civilization erased nearly 97,000 years ago would leave little behind. Its cities would be buried under deserts or submerged by seas. Its knowledge would survive only through myth, symbol, and fragments carried by survivors. But Egypt, more than any other culture, preserved those fragments, in stone, in ritual, in the very orientation of its monuments, in the stories told by priests and inscribed on tomb walls. Egypt is a palimpsest, an overwritten text where traces of earlier stories remain faintly visible beneath newer lines. To read it, one must look beyond the surface and trace the echoes of a world that came before. Perhaps the first civilization did not vanish completely. Perhaps it lives on in Egypt's oldest stones, in the Sphinx's eroded face, in the geometry of pyramids, in the myths of gods who walked the earth, in the star alignments that mirror a sky long forgotten. Perhaps Egypt was not the dawn of civilization, but the remembrance of an ancient sunrise. And if that is true, then the story of humanity is older, deeper, and grander than we ever imagined, stretching across epochs of light and darkness, rising again and again from the ruins of forgotten worlds. Across the ocean from Africa and the ancient Nile, beyond the continental shelves where forgotten coastlines sleep beneath the waves, lies a region whose mysteries stretch back so far they seem almost immune to time. The Americas, North, Central, and South, are often framed as the New World, supposedly settled late, supposedly isolated, supposedly untouched by the deeper currents of prehistoric civilization. But the deeper archaeologists dig, the older the anomalies become. And in the jungles, mountains, and deserts of the Western Hemisphere, the past whispers in shapes too precise, too aligned, and too deliberate to belong solely to the cultures we know. beneath the ruins of Maya temples, among the megaliths of the Andes, carved into the desert plains of Peru, and hidden in the oldest caves of Brazil, lie remnants of a world whose story began long before accepted history dares to acknowledge. The Americas are not a blank chapter. They are one of the oldest chapters of all. One of the first cracks in the orthodox timeline appeared in a Brazilian rock shelter known as Pedra Furada. Excavations there uncovered signs of human presence: charcoal, tools, pigments, dating as far back as 32,000 years ago. Some argue the dates go even deeper, perhaps 40,000 or 50,000 years or more. But even the conservative estimate shatters the idea that humans only reached the Americas around 13,500 years ago. The famous Clovis culture, once believed to represent the earliest Americans, now occupies a tiny sliver of a far older, more complex timeline. In recent decades, site after site has added weight to this truth. Humans may have crossed into the Americas during warm climate windows long before the last glaciation. Perhaps even during the last interglacial period, nearly 100,000 years ago. Monteverde in Chile drove the dagger deeper. Its preserved wooden structures, medicinal plant usage, and evidence of a settled community dating to more than 18,000 years ago, possibly older, show a level of organization no one expected from people supposedly new to the continent. Monteverde was not a temporary camp. It was a village with shared planning, storage, and sophisticated knowledge of the local environment. And if Monteverde existed 18,000 years ago at the southern tip of the Americas, then people must have been moving across the continent thousands of years before that. The Americas were not empty. They were inhabited, traversed, understood, and shaped by cultures vastly older than the earliest cities of the Middle East. The next anomaly emerges in the Amazon. For centuries, the rainforest was assumed to be too hostile, too fragile, too nutrient-poor to support large pre-modern populations. The myth of the pristine jungle persisted until archaeologists discovered the truth. Beneath the trees lies a vast network of geometric earthworks, circles, squares, causeways, and raised platforms spreading for hundreds of miles across Brazil and Bolivia. Some structures are so large they can only be seen from above, hidden by canopy and time. These earthworks were not simple enclosures. They were ceremonial centers, astronomical markers, and engineered landscapes. Their builders reshaped the soil itself into terra preta, a nutrient-rich black earth created through controlled burning and organic engineering. Terra preta does not occur naturally. It was made intentionally in enormous quantities across the Amazon. This engineered soil remains fertile for thousands of years, refusing to degrade. Its chemical stability implies intentional, repeated innovation. Whoever lived there understood agriculture, chemistry, ecology, and environmental maintenance at a level equal to, or possibly beyond, many early Old World civilizations. But perhaps the oldest mysteries lie not in soil, but in stone. Deep in the highlands of Peru and Bolivia stands one of the most enigmatic archaeological sites on Earth, Puma Punku. The precision of its stone blocks, massive andesite slabs shaped with perfect right angles, interlocking tabs, and surfaces as smooth as glass, has defied easy explanation since its discovery. Archaeologists date Puma Punku to around 1,500 years ago, built by the Tiwanaku culture. But erosion patterns, subterranean layers, and the presence of megaliths far older than the Tiwanaku suggest a more complex story. Some stones appear to have been recarved from earlier structures, possibly remnants of a much older civilization destroyed by flood or tectonic upheaval. At nearby Tiwanaku, the Sun Gate aligns with astronomical positions that shift slowly over thousands of years due to precession. The alignments seem to match a sky far older than the accepted construction date. If the earliest phases of Tiwanaku, or Pumapunku, align with star positions from 12,000 or even 15,000 years ago, then their origins lie within the same narrow window of global upheaval that marked the end of the last ice age. And if that is the case, then these sites may have been built or rebuilt by survivors of a much older world. Turning north, the incredible city of Teotihuacan rises from the Mexican plateau. No one knows who built it. No one knows their name, their language, or their origins. Even the Aztecs, arriving millennia later, called it the City of the Gods, because they believed only divine beings could have constructed it. The layout of Teotihuacan mirrors astronomical patterns. The Pyramid of the Sun aligns with the setting of the Pleiades. The Avenue of the Dead is tilted to reflect cosmic cycles. Beneath the pyramids lie intricate tunnels filled with mercury, pyrite, mica, and symbols representing the underworld. The complexity of the city's geometry suggests a deep knowledge of measurement and cosmology. Some researchers believe Teotihuacan encodes a scale model of the solar system, with distances between structures corresponding proportionally to planetary orbits. Whether intentional or coincidental, the pattern is there. And the absence of writing from such a vast urban culture is perhaps the greatest mystery of all. It is as if the founders of Teotihuacan inherited knowledge without the script that originally carried it. Fragments of a blueprint from a vanished epoch. In the deserts of Peru, the Nazca lines stretch across the plains. Geometric shapes, spirals, perfectly straight lines running for miles, and massive geoglyphs of animals only visible from above. The Nazca people created them between 500 BCE and 500 CE. But the oldest lines, the deepest geoglyphs etched by removing oxidized rock, may predate Nazca culture. Some align with solstices, others point to distant mountain peaks. The largest lines are so straight they would require surveying tools more precise than what is typically attributed to ancient cultures. The Nazca lines remain one of the clearest indicators of ancient Americans' deep connection to astronomy and geometry, suggesting they were working within a tradition much older than themselves. Across the continent in North America, the mound-building cultures provide another layer. Cahokia, the largest pre-Columbian city north of Mexico, once held tens of thousands of people, featuring a complex urban grid, skilled artisans, and astronomical wood henges that tracked equinoxes and solstices. But older still are the Poverty Point earthworks in Louisiana. Massive concentric ridges built around 3,500 years ago, but constructed with a complexity suggestive of deeper historical roots. And then there are the truly ancient effigies and petroglyphs scattered across the American Southwest. Spirals carved into canyon walls that align with specific sun shadows on solstice mornings. Rock art depicting star patterns, supernova, and solar cycles. Mound structures oriented toward cardinal directions. These patterns mirror astronomical traditions found worldwide, as if ancient Americans shared the same cosmological inheritance as their counterparts across the ocean. But the story goes deeper still. One of the most puzzling discoveries in the Americas lies within the ancient carvings of the Pacific Northwest, where indigenous myths describe a great flood, a lost homeland, and ancestors who crossed waters from a place destroyed by rising seas. The echoes of these myths match those of cultures in Polynesia, Japan, Indonesia, and even Africa. This cannot be dismissed lightly. Oral traditions, when repeated faithfully, can preserve memories of real events across tens of thousands of years, especially events as traumatic as a global flood or a collapsing civilization. Further south, the legends of the Andean world speak of Viracocha, the civilizer, a mysterious figure said to have emerged from the sea after a great cataclysm. Viracocha brought knowledge, architecture, mathematics, and moral codes to the scattered survivors of a world overturned. His description matches culture heroes from distant lands: Oans of Sumer, Osiris of Egypt, Manu of India, Quetzalcoatl of Mesoamerica. Tall, bearded, radiant figures emerging after disaster to restore knowledge. Whether literal or symbolic, these legends hint at humans who carried fragments of a vanished global tradition. Even more mysterious are the connections between South America and ancient Polynesia. The sweet potato, a South American crop, appears in Polynesia thousands of years before European contact. DNA evidence shows pre-Columbian contact between Polynesians and indigenous groups of South America. This contact required long-distance ocean navigation, an ability Polynesians possessed. But the earliest Polynesian expansion itself dates back nearly 50,000 years, possibly earlier. If maritime cultures existed in remote antiquity, could their roots stretch back into the last interglacial period, when global temperatures were similar to today and coastlines drastically different? The remnants of long-lost coastal settlements lie underwater now. Some may rest on the continental shelves off California, others beneath the Caribbean, some under the Gulf of Mexico. Sonar scans of the Bimini Road near the Bahamas reveal neatly arranged blocks suggestive of a submerged harbor or ceremonial structure. Though controversial, the formation is consistent with early megalithic patterns seen elsewhere. And in the deep waters off Cuba, sonar detected massive geometric structures arranged in a grid-like city layout 2,000 feet below the surface. If confirmed, such a site would predate all known American civilizations by tens of thousands of years. Skeptics argue natural formation, and many underwater anomalies will indeed prove to be geological. But the persistence of global underwater anomalies, Japan, India, Southeast Asia, the Mediterranean, and the Americas, suggests an unmistakable pattern. Ancient humans lived along coasts that are now underwater, and some of those coastlines may have supported complex cultures far earlier than acknowledged. The possibility of a prehistoric civilization in the Americas is further supported by the peculiar consistency of sacred geometry across continents. Spirals, circles, and solar markers appear in rock art from Arizona to Armenia, from Peru to Sudan. Multiplying these coincidences by tens of thousands of years suggests something more than independent invention. It suggests a deep ancestral memory carried across migrations, preserved across cataclysms. Consider the mathematical ratios embedded in Mesoamerican pyramids. Their base-to-height proportions echo those found in Egyptian structures. Consider the serpent imagery associated with both Quetzalcoatl and the Egyptian Uraeus. Consider the emphasis on equinoxes and solstices across both hemispheres. These are not proofs of direct contact. They are hints of a shared lineage, symbolic, cosmological, and intellectual, reaching back into the abyss of deep time. If a civilization nearly 97,000 years old once existed, its people could have migrated outward as their world collapsed, spreading their scientific and symbolic traditions across continents. Some reached Africa, some reached Asia, some reached the Americas. Over millennia, their descendants adapted these traditions into new forms: pyramids in Egypt, mounds in Ohio, pyramids again in Mexico, megaliths in Peru, star temples in the Amazon, and effigy mounds shaped like serpents and birds. The differences between cultures today do not reflect separate origins. They reflect separate survivals. The Americas hold some of the most ancient landscapes in human memory: jungles that swallow stone, mountains that shelter legends, deserts that preserve geoglyphs for millennia. And beneath all of them, in caves, in petroglyphs, in the orientation of sacred structures, in genetic lineages stretching tens of thousands of years into the past, the truth remains. This land is not a newcomer in the human story. It is one of the original chapters, a chapter whose pages are burned, buried, drowned, and shattered, but not lost. Perhaps the first civilization left no metal tools behind. Perhaps it left no written records. Perhaps it left no cities on land we can reach today. But it left something else: memories encoded in myth, knowledge embedded in stone, patterns repeated across continents, and the enduring legacy of people who carried fragments of the ancient world into the new one. If the Americas were part of that lost world, then they were not isolated. They were central, another shore of a civilization that spanned a world we no longer recognize. And as we confront these ancient fingerprints across deserts, mountains, jungles, and oceans, we begin to understand that the story of humanity is far older, far stranger, and far more interconnected than anything written in our history books. The ruins remain, the memory endures, and the truth waits, buried just beneath the surface of a world that has forgotten itself. Across the vast arc of the Pacific, where chains of volcanic islands rise like stepping stones across the water, a different kind of ancient memory survives. A memory not carved in stone like the megaliths of Egypt or the Andes, but carried in stories, navigation patterns, genealogies, and sky lore preserved by cultures whose roots stretch deeper than written history. The Pacific is the largest ocean on the planet, a world unto itself. And yet for tens of thousands of years, it was crossed by people who had no metal tools, no compasses, no charts, no written language. What they possessed instead was something far older and far more profound: a mastery of the ocean inherited from ancestors who may have sailed in ages long before the rise of the first cities. The peopling of the Pacific is one of the greatest achievements in human history. But within this achievement lies a larger mystery, one that hints at forgotten ages, submerged lands, and ancient networks erased by time. To understand the Pacific's role in humanity's deep past, we must begin with one of the earliest expansions ever attempted by our species: the settlement of Australia and New Guinea. Archaeological and genetic evidence suggests that humans reached Sahel, the prehistoric supercontinent formed by Australia, Tasmania, and Papua New Guinea, at least 60,000 years ago, possibly earlier. But even that figure may be too conservative. Some recent dating pushes human presence in northern Australia to 65,000 years ago, and a few contested findings argue for even older occupation. Regardless of the precise date, one fact is beyond dispute. Even at the lowest estimate, humans crossed open ocean to reach Sahel. This was not a simple drift on debris or accidental landfall. It required intentional seafaring, boats, coordination, planning, and a knowledge of winds and currents at a time when humans were supposedly little more than foragers. The models of migration into Sahul suggest that these early navigators conducted crossings involving dozens, possibly hundreds, of individuals, far too many for random chance. They were deliberate voyages in a time when the world's coastlines looked vastly different from today. During the last interglacial period, sea levels were significantly lower, exposing continental shelves that allowed shorter but still challenging crossings. These early mariners would have seen lands now deep underwater, archipelagos that no longer exist, stepping stones that vanished when seas rose after the ice returned. Whatever coastal settlements they built now lie drowned beneath hundreds of feet of water. If any record of them survives, it is hidden in the sediment of the Timor Sea, the Arafura Sea, and the Gulf of Carpentaria. The Aboriginal cultures of Australia, among the oldest continuous cultures on Earth, preserve oral traditions describing events tens of thousands of years old, stories of coastlines that no longer exist, mountains that once touched the sea, and great floods that reshaped the land. Some tales recount ancestors arriving by sea to a land filled with giant animals. Others describe star patterns corresponding to constellations visible only in ancient skies. These stories are not vague myth. They contain precise geographic details matching paleo-environmental reconstructions. They suggest not only long-term continuity, but also a memory of ancient navigators whose skills may reflect even older maritime traditions. To the north, the islands of Southeast Asia host other fragments of this forgotten world. The Sunda Shelf, now mostly underwater, once connected Malaysia, Indonesia, Borneo, and Sumatra in a vast subcontinent stretching thousands of miles. During warm interglacial periods, this land hosted rivers, plains, and coastlines ideal for human settlement. It may have been one of the great hubs of early human civilization, a cradle of maritime knowledge that spread across the Pacific and Indian Oceans. The oldest tools in Sulawesi, dating to more than 60,000 years ago, show that humans were crossing deep water channels far earlier than mainstream archaeology believed possible. Even more astonishing, discoveries of rock art in Sulawesi, including hand stencils and animal paintings dating back over 45,000 years, demonstrate that these ancient communities possessed symbolic and artistic traditions as old as or older than those in Europe. But to understand the full reach of ancient Pacific navigation, we must look eastward, to the islands that dot the remote reaches of Polynesia, Micronesia, and Melanesia. These islands were settled by people who carried no metal, no writing, no beasts of burden, only memory, sky lore, and star knowledge. Polynesians sailed thousands of miles across open ocean using navigational methods that defy modern assumptions. Reading swells with their bodies, sensing bird flight patterns, mapping islands by the reflections of waves, and memorizing entire star compasses that shifted with the seasons. These techniques are so sophisticated that even with modern tools, few sailors today can replicate them. To say these skills emerged suddenly from trial and error undervalues the depth of understanding they required. Polynesian voyages depended on wayfinding, an ancient, data-rich discipline encoding generations of environmental knowledge. Each navigator memorized the rising and setting positions of hundreds of stars, the behavior of swells reflecting off distant islands, the migration routes of seabirds, and the shape of clouds formed by land masses beyond the horizon. This knowledge was inherited, preserved, ritualized, and guarded by specialists who carried it as sacred tradition. The complexity of wayfinding suggests a lineage stretching back far beyond the cultural horizon of Polynesia, perhaps to the earliest maritime traditions in Southeast Asia or even earlier, to a civilization whose memory now lies drowned. But Polynesian expansion itself is only one strand of the Pacific mystery. The Americas and Polynesia share cultural, linguistic, and even genetic traces indicating ancient contact long before European arrival. The sweet potato, a crop native to South America, appears in Polynesia more than 1,000 years ago. Its Polynesian name matches Andean linguistic roots. Chicken bones found in Chile match Polynesian genetic lineages. These exchanges imply deliberate voyages across the world's largest ocean. If Polynesians could cross thousands of miles using nothing but memory and starlight, what might earlier mariners have achieved? What voyages might have taken place tens of thousands of years ago during warmer climates and different coastlines? Some of the deepest enigmas of human prehistory lie in the remote island of Rapa Nui, Easter Island. The Moai statues, towering stone figures carved from volcanic tuff, face inward from the coastline as if guarding a lost center rather than an outward threat. Their makers crafted hundreds of statues weighing up to 80 tons, transporting them miles across the island using methods still debated today. But the greater mystery lies not in how they were moved, but why they were made. The Moai represent ancestors, culture bearers, memory itself. Some researchers believe the earliest Moai traditions may date back far earlier than the island's accepted settlement timeline, echoing symbolic frameworks seen across the Pacific and even beyond. The Rongo-Rongo script of Easter Island adds yet another layer of complexity. It remains undeciphered, a rare case of an isolated writing system emerging in a culture without clear antecedents. Whether Rongo-Rongo represents true writing or mnemonic iconography is debated, but its existence suggests the island's ancestors carried symbolic traditions older than their physical isolation. Some glyphs resemble motifs seen in ancient South American art, raising the possibility of shared or parallel symbolic evolution rooted in a deeper past. But the Pacific's greatest secret may lie in its drowned landscapes. Beneath the waves near Japan lies Yonaguni, a submerged stone structure featuring terraces, steps, and rectilinear blocks arranged in patterns eerily reminiscent of megalithic complexes. Whether natural or artificial, Yonaguni rests at a depth that would have been above water during the last glacial maximum, but submerged afterward. If humans modified it, then they did so more than 10,000 years ago. And if Yonaguni was part of a larger coastal settlement, as some sonar scans suggest, then the Pacific Rim may have hosted cultures far older than the written civilizations of China or India. Similar anomalies appear off the coast of Taiwan, the Philippines, and New Zealand. Underwater ridges resembling paved paths, rectangular foundations aligned with ancient shorelines, caverns showing signs of tool marks. None of these are definitive, but each fragment adds weight to the possibility that early humans built along coastlines now hidden underwater, and that some of these settlements may date back to the last interglacial period. Throughout Polynesia, legends recount submerged homelands. Hawaiians speak of Kanaloa's sunken kingdoms. Maori traditions describe Hawaii, the ancestral land swallowed by the sea. Samoan and Tongan stories reference vanishing islands, ancient floods, and migrations from lands that no longer exist. While mythology evolves, its core motifs often preserve memories of real events. Rising seas after the last ice age inundated enormous areas of the Pacific. Entire archipelagos that served as stepping stones for early maritime cultures disappeared beneath the ocean. Perhaps the navigators who carried tradition across the Pacific were preserving not only their own stories, but fragments of a much older maritime world. The Pacific's role in humanity's deep past cannot be understood without considering its link to other ancient regions. The symbolic and architectural parallels between Pacific megaliths and those in places like Peru, Micronesia, and Southeast Asia suggest a shared heritage. Nan Madol, a city of massive basalt columns built on artificial islands in Micronesia, mirrors the engineering seen in ancient Andean cultures. The use of polygonal stones, interlocking basalt prisms, and water-based construction techniques spans oceans and millennia. Some of these similarities may arise independently, but others, especially cosmological alignments and shared symbolic motifs, hint at deeper connections. Even the star-based cosmologies of Pacific cultures reflect patterns found in ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, and Mesoamerica. The Pleiades hold central significance across these regions as markers of time, seasons, and navigation. The Milky Way is represented as a cosmic river or path of souls. The dark rifts within the Milky Way are interpreted as animals, spirits, or gateways across thousands of miles. These parallels suggest that humanity's earliest sky lore may have been formed before continents became isolated by rising seas, before the memory of the first civilization was scattered by catastrophe. What might this mean for the hypothesis of a civilization 97,000 years ago? It suggests that the Pacific was not peripheral to that world. It was essential. During the last interglacial warm period, sea levels were lower than today, exposing vast coastal plains and island chains ideal for maritime culture. The ancestors of modern Polynesians, Melanesians, and indigenous Australians may have inherited traditions from this ancient maritime civilization. Their navigation skills, star compasses, and deep ocean knowledge may be echoes of a world that existed long before writing, agriculture, or the cities we now call ancient. The Pacific, then, becomes a vast archive, not of stone archives like Giza or Teotihuacan, but an archive of memory, encoded in myth, ritual, navigation knowledge, and genetic lineages stretching tens of thousands of years into the past. It is an ocean of clues pointing toward a deeper, older human story. Modern researchers often struggle to reconcile the sophistication of ancient Pacific navigators with the timelines assigned to their origins. But the answer may lie not in the immediate past, but in the distant one. If a civilization existed during the last interglacial period, its greatest legacy may have been maritime knowledge, knowledge essential for survival as coastlines flooded and ancient homelands vanished beneath the waves. Survivors may have carried this knowledge into new lands, Sahul, Polynesia, the Americas, spreading fragments of a lost tradition across the world. The Pacific, with its vastness and silence, hides its secrets well. But in the stories of its people, in the stars they follow, in the migrations carved into their genetics, and in the drowned landscapes that lie unseen beneath its waters, the truth waits. It is a truth older than pyramids, older than cave paintings, older than the oldest megaliths on land. It is the memory of a world that once navigated oceans now forgotten, a civilization erased by rising seas, carried into the future by those who survived, and echoed across thousands of islands through stories whispered in the language of stars. We do not fully understand that world, but its fingerprints remain, on the waves, in the constellations, in the ancestral memory of a people who learned to read the ocean like a map written in motion and light. Perhaps the first civilization did not build monuments of stone. Perhaps it built monuments of knowledge, passed down through navigators and storytellers who kept their world alive long after the land that birthed it was swallowed by the sea. In the end, the Pacific is not the last frontier of exploration, it is the first. And somewhere beneath its endless blue, the memory of a civilization nearly 97,000 years old still drifts, waiting for the day humanity finally remembers how ancient it truly is. Long before the last ice sheets collapsed, before the younger Dryas storms shredded coastlines, before the first known temples rose in the Fertile Crescent, humanity was already staring upward, toward the sky, the stars, the darkness beyond the firelight. The night sky was not merely a backdrop to ancient life. It was a map, a clock, a calendar, a living story written in light. It was a vault of memory holding patterns far older than recorded history, preserved across cultures separated by oceans and millennia. And when you trace these sky traditions back, not to Babylon or Egypt or Greece, but deeper, past the limits of archaeology, you begin to see something extraordinary. The possibility that humanity's earliest astronomical knowledge may have originated not from scattered tribes independently discovering the heavens, but from a shared ancestor civilization whose understanding of the cosmos far exceeded what we assume of ancient humans. Astronomy is not simple. To mark the rising of a star at the same horizon point year after year requires long-term observation. To identify precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis over a 26,000-year cycle, requires generational memory. Yet ancient cultures across the world encoded precessional cycles into myth, architecture, and ritual. Egypt's alignment of the pyramids with Orion's belt marks a stellar configuration from around 10,500 BCE. The Maya tracked the precessional cycle through the movement of the Pleiades. The Indus Valley and Vedic traditions speak of star ages and cosmic cycles lasting tens of thousands of years. Aboriginal Australians recount constellations as they appeared 60,000 years ago, and Polynesian navigators used star paths reflecting patterns unchanged for tens of millennia. If multiple cultures independently tracked these immense cycles, it implies something even more staggering: that human astronomical observation predates all known civilizations by tens of thousands of years. But history insists that complex astronomy emerged only after agriculture, writing, and state-level organization. So where did humanity first learn the sky? One of the most compelling clues emerges from the ancient stone observatories scattered across the world. At Nabta Playa, in Egypt's western desert, megaliths erected more than 7,000 years ago track the rising of Sirius and align with the summer solstice. The site predates Stonehenge by thousands of years, but even Nabta Playa may be the echo of something older. The alignment patterns match star positions accurate only if the original observations began long before the structures were built, perhaps during the wet phases of the Sahara, when the desert was green and lakes shimmered beneath the sun. At Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, possibly the world's oldest known ceremonial complex, T-pillars arranged in circular enclosures form a pattern some researchers interpret as a star map. Carvings of animals, symbols, and abstract shapes may correspond to constellations. If these interpretations are correct, then Göbekli Tepe's builders were tracking the sky more than 11,000 years ago, long before agriculture is believed to have emerged. But the depth of astronomical knowledge implied by Göbekli Tepe suggests a culture older than the site itself. The builders were not inventing astronomy, they were inheriting it. Far to the west, in the Americas, ancient skywatchers embedded their cosmology into earth and stone. The ancestral Puebloans constructed solstice markers using cliff shadows. At Chaco Canyon, buildings align with cardinal directions, lunar standstill cycles, and the paths of stars. The petroglyphs of Chaco even depict the 1054 supernova explosion observed worldwide. The Maya tracked Venus with astonishing precision, recording astronomical tables that match modern observations to within a fraction of a day. Their long-count calendar cycles span thousands of years, reflecting a cosmology of vast ages rarely acknowledged in mainstream archaeology. Yet the Maya were not unique. In the Andes, the people of Tiwanaku and later the Inca aligned temples, roads, and sacred sites with the Milky Way, known as the Celestial River. The Chavin culture carved animals representing dark nebulae, the shadowy voids in the Milky Way visible only to those who study the sky intensely. Across the Pacific, Polynesian navigation relied on star compasses encoding knowledge of dozens of constellations and seasonal star paths. In Australia, Aboriginal sky lore preserves precise descriptions of the Imu in the sky, a constellation made not of stars but of dark spaces between them. This global pattern suggests not only widespread astronomical observation, but a shared symbolic matrix encoded so deeply into human culture that even 100,000-year-old populations might have known the night sky intimately. If a lost civilization existed during the interglacial period 97,000 years ago, it would have been born beneath the same stars, and its knowledge, passed through memory, myth, or migration, might still shine through the traditions of its descendants. The evidence becomes even more compelling when examining ancient creation myths. In Egypt, creation begins with a primordial mound rising from the water. In Mesopotamia, the Apsu and Tiamat represent the cosmic waters. In India, the cosmic ocean is churned by gods to bring forth life. In Polynesian mythology, the sea and sky were once one. In Mesoamerica, the world emerges from primordial water. Even the Bible echoes this motif. And the earth was without form, and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. These parallels suggest not simply shared metaphorical imagination, but a shared memory of a world shaped by water, a drowned world. Rising seas at the end of the last interglacial period, and again at the end of the last ice age, would have submerged coastal settlements globally. Survivors would have carried the trauma into myth. Over tens of millennia, the literal details would fade, leaving only symbolic echoes. The world beginning from water, gods arriving across the sea, civilization reborn after destruction. But alongside these watery memories lies another recurring motif: beings descending from the sky. The Dogon of Mali speak of the Nomo, water spirits said to come from the star Sirius. Polynesian legends describe sky travelers who brought knowledge. The Maori speak of celestial visitors. The Maya and Aztecs recount feathered serpents, sky-bearers of wisdom. Egypt's gods cross the sky in celestial boats. Sumerian myths describe sky beings bringing civilization from above. Modern interpretations often leap toward extraterrestrial explanations, but a more grounded reading is possible. Perhaps these sky figures symbolize ancient astronomer priests, people who tracked the heavens with knowledge inherited from an era far older than the civilizations that recorded the myths. Their arrival after catastrophe would have looked like a visitation of gods. Their knowledge would have seemed divine. If the first civilization fell 97,000 years ago, its survivors might have migrated across the world in small groups. They would have carried star lore, mathematics, navigation skills, and symbolic systems refined over thousands of years. In a world of shattered landscapes and scattered tribes, they would have been cultural giants. Their teachings about the stars, the seasons, the cycles would become mythologized, immortalized in stories of gods descending from the sky. Architecture provides another layer of evidence. Megalithic structures around the world share not only engineering techniques, but astronomical alignments. Newgrange in Ireland, built over 5,000 years ago, illuminates its inner chamber only on the winter solstice. Stonehenge tracks solstices and possibly lunar cycles. Machu Picchu aligns with solstices and the rising of specific stars. Chavin de Huantar, Teotihuacan, and the great mounds of North America all encode celestial principles. These structures appear suddenly, fully formed, without earlier prototypes. It's as if early civilizations were rebuilding monumental astronomy from memories of an older world. But perhaps the most enigmatic evidence of ancient astronomy lies in the constellations themselves. Across continents, cultures identify Orion as a hunter, the Pleiades as sisters, the Milky Way as a river or pathway. These interpretations appear in Greek mythology, Aboriginal lore, Navajo cosmology, Indian Vedic tradition, and Polynesian navigation stories. Such consistency across distant cultures suggests that these stories may have originated long before humans dispersed across the continents. Perhaps in a shared ancestral society, predating the last glacial cycles. One of the most provocative clues is the repeated depiction of the Pleiades cluster as feminine: 7 sisters, 7 daughters, 7 maidens. Yet most people can only see 6 stars with the naked eye today. Astronomers have shown that one star in the cluster has dimmed significantly over the last 100,000 years. The story of the lost sister appears in traditions across 5 continents. This implies a single origin, an extremely ancient origin, of the myth. One that predates not only written civilization, but the dispersal of humanity itself. If humans tens of thousands of years ago were tracking star brightness variations, then their astronomical knowledge surpasses what most believe possible. When we turn from mythology to mathematics, the evidence deepens. Numerous ancient cultures encode the number 72, a key value in precession. The sky shifts 1 degree every 72 years. Ancient Egyptians, Sumerians, Maya, and even Chinese traditions embed this number in their cosmology, calendars, and sacred texts. Likewise, cycles of 2,160 years, the length of one zodiac age, and 25,120 years, the full precessional cycle, appear repeatedly across world religions and myth systems. Such knowledge requires long-term observation, thousands of years. It cannot be invented quickly. It must be inherited. The idea that prehistoric hunter-gatherers independently tracked precession across continents strains credulity. But if a civilization existed during a stable, warm climate 97,000 years ago, a civilization with continuity over tens of millennia, then precessional knowledge becomes not only plausible, but inevitable. They would have seen skies unfamiliar to us today. Their constellations, their myths, their alignments would reflect a cosmic stage long vanished. Where, then, are their observatories, their temples, their cities? Beneath the ocean, beneath the desert, beneath ash from eruptions that scarred the earth, beneath tectonic uplift, erosion, and continental drift. Submerged coastlines hide the earliest chapters of human skywatching, but some hints may still exist. Off the coast of India, sonar scans reveal rectilinear patterns resembling ancient astronomical platforms. Beneath the Mediterranean, temples lie submerged, aligned with celestial orientations. In Southeast Asia, megalithic sites oriented toward solstices lie on islands that were once mountaintops of larger land masses. The lost land of Sundaland, submerged after the last ice age, may have hosted vast coastal populations. Their sky lore would have spread across the Pacific and Indian Oceans as they migrated in all directions. Even the earliest forms of writing may be echoes of long-lost cosmology. The Indus Valley script features astronomical motifs matching Vedic star maps. Sumerian cuneiform contains stellar records older than any written chronicle. Egyptian hieroglyphs reflect a symbolic system where stars govern destiny. Across the Americas, symbols carved thousands of years apart depict spirals, suns, serpents, and star patterns matching constellations tracked worldwide. These glyphs appear on rocks in Arizona, temples in Mexico, and megaliths in Peru. They connect cultures separated by distance, but united by a shared celestial heritage. When viewed together, the global pattern becomes unmistakable. Humanity inherited a deep-time astronomy, a celestial science older than agriculture, older than writing, older than the oldest ruins still standing. It is a science born from a world erased. If the first civilization was truly 97,000 years ago, its primary legacy would not be stone temples. Stone erodes, stone sinks, stone breaks. Its true legacy would be sky knowledge, eternal, unchanging, carried in memory, preserved in myth, rebuilt in stone by its descendants. The night sky never forgets, and neither do the stories humans tell about it. Across continents, across eras, across cultures that never met, the same cosmic ideas appear. Cycles of destruction, rebirth from floods, gods descending from constellations, sacred numbers representing precessional ages, pyramids and mounds aligned to the heavens, mythic heroes who restore cosmic order. These are not coincidences. They are the shadows of a forgotten age. As we stand beneath the same stars our ancestors saw 97,000 years ago, one truth becomes clear. We are not the first to map the heavens. We are not the first to measure time in celestial cycles. We are not the first to feel the pull of the cosmos. We are simply the latest. The first astronomers may have lived in a world now drowned, a world whose sky stories drift through our cultures like echoes of a civilization erased. They looked up at a canopy of stars unlike the one we see today, a sky brighter, clearer, untamed by light, unmarred by memory, and in that sky they saw themselves. Their legacy is all around us, invisible yet undeniable, in stories, rituals, architecture, and myths that have outlived continents. Their world is gone, but their knowledge remains. And through that knowledge, their civilization, however ancient, however lost, still speaks to us in the language of the stars. In the end, after all the ruins, the myths, the submerged coastlines, the astronomical alignments, the scattered fragments of a world that should not have been able to exist yet somehow left fingerprints everywhere, one final question rises like a shadow behind everything we think we know. If humanity has lived through cycles of creation and collapse for tens of thousands of years, what exactly was lost? Not in the poetic sense, not metaphorically, literally. What kind of world vanished nearly 97,000 years ago, leaving behind only echoes carved into stone, encoded in myths, scattered in genetic lineages, and preserved in rituals so ancient that even their practitioners no longer remember why they exist? To answer that question, you must imagine a world unlike any depicted in textbooks. A world shaped not by kingdoms or empires, not by iron or bronze, but by time. An ocean of time so vast that human culture could rise, fall, and fade long before the civilizations we call ancient ever took their first breath. A world where ice and warmth traded places in long, slow pulses, reshaping continents, creating and erasing coastlines, and forcing ancient peoples to adapt constantly to a planet in flux. A world where humanity did not just endure these cycles, but evolved culturally and cognitively within them. This forgotten humanity would have lived along the coasts of Africa, Arabia, India, Southeast Asia, Australia, and the Americas, lands now drowned beneath hundreds of feet of water. They would have followed the migration of herds across green corridors where deserts now stand. They would have built early centers of gathering near lakes that no longer exist, mapped the skies through generations, and passed knowledge through memory instead of writing. And their greatest cities, if we can even use that word, might lie buried under coral and sediment in places where no archaeologist has ever dug. The world of 97,000 years ago was not empty. It was dynamic, lush in many regions, harsh in others, and full of humanity's earliest experiments in complexity. We have always assumed that civilization requires metal, writing, and agriculture. But what if the first civilization required none of those things? What if its foundation was not agriculture but navigation, movement along the coasts, trade across shallow seas, knowledge of tides, stars, and migratory patterns? What if complexity emerged not from centralized cities, but from networks, loose, fluid, enduring networks of knowledge keepers, sky watchers, seafarers, and builders whose architectural feats were anchored not to permanence, but to memory? To glimpse that world, you must look at the oldest human behaviors that still persist. The ritual dances of Aboriginal Australians, recounting stories of creation stretching back tens of thousands of years. The star compasses memorized by Polynesian navigators, carrying the sky in their minds. The megalithic traditions echoing in Africa, Europe, and the Americas. The careful observation of solstices and equinoxes by cultures separated by continents. These are not recent inventions. They are cultural fossils, remnants of a time when the entire world revolved around cycles of the earth and sky. Imagine a coastal settlement on the Sunda Shelf 27,000 years ago, built near rivers that no longer exist, surrounded by forests that vanished beneath rising seas. The people there might have carved simple geometric patterns into stone, aligning them with celestial events. They may have built wooden structures long gone, woven stories into their children's memories, and tracked ocean swells as precisely as modern sailors track GPS coordinates. Their life was not primitive. It was simply shaped by a different set of priorities. Now imagine another settlement on the North American coastline, near what is now the drowned edge of the Pacific Shelf. Its people might have watched the same stars as those on the Sunda Shelf, tracking cycles passed down from ancestors older than the continents themselves. Their stories of creation, destruction, and rebirth would later emerge in vastly different forms: the flood myths of the Pacific Northwest, the cosmologies of the Maya, the star lore of the Hopi. But they would share a common root. Imagine yet another settlement in northern Africa, near lakes that no longer exist, surrounded by grasslands where giraffes and elephants roamed. Carvings made by these people, spirals, circles, cosmic symbols, would one day be adopted by their descendants and reappear thousands of miles away in the rock art of Australia and Arizona. These symbols were not random. They were mnemonic devices, encoded memory. Now imagine a group of survivors leaving one of these settlements after an environmental catastrophe. Perhaps a rapid cooling event, a sudden rise in sea level, or a volcanic eruption that darkened the sky. They travel inland toward rivers and mountains. They carry only what they can remember: stories, songs, star paths, geometries. They meet other groups, share knowledge, merge traditions, and eventually settle in new lands. Over generations, their memories harden into myth. Millennia later, their descendants build stone structures aligned to the sky, not because their ancestors once built in stone, but because the sky knowledge remained long after everything else vanished. This is how the legacy of a 97,000-year-old world could survive without leaving obvious ruins, not through stone cities or written archives, but through cultural DNA, habits, patterns, symbols, alignments, myths, and cosmologies that spread across the globe as humanity migrated. Those migrations happened not once, but many times. The Earth's climate oscillates every 100,000 years, driven by orbital cycles. Each warm period may have seen rises in population, innovation, and complexity. Each cold period may have shattered networks, drowned coastlines, and scattered peoples into new regions. The narrative of one rise of civilization collapses when confronted with these cycles. Instead, a new picture emerges: humanity rising and falling repeatedly, like breath. The strongest evidence for this is not the ruins we can see, but the ruins we cannot see. More than 20 million square kilometers of land were flooded after the last ice age alone. Coastal plains that once hosted fertile ground became continental shelves. Rivers that once fed settlements became underwater canyons. Whatever stood there, settlements, workshops, temples, observatories, was erased. But the memory survived. We see it in the taboo stories of Pacific Islanders warning of sunken islands. We see it in the Vedic yugas describing cycles of destruction. We see it in the Egyptian Zep Tepi. We see it in the Mesoamerican ages of the sun. We see it in Aboriginal Dreamtime. We see it in African flood myths and European legends of lost lands. We see it in the symbols of serpents, spirals, seven sisters, cosmic eggs, and world mountains repeated across continents. These myths are not identical, but they share a structure, a deep grammar that points to a common ancestral memory of destruction and rebirth. In this sense, the story of a nearly 97,000-year-old civilization is not fantasy. It is not invention. It is the logical extension of everything the world's oldest cultures have been trying to tell us. But what happened to that civilization? What destroyed it? The answer lies in the rhythms of the planet itself. Around 97,000 years ago, Earth entered the early stages of a major glacial transition. Temperatures dropped, sea levels fell, ecosystems collapsed. Coastlines changed rapidly, populations shrank, entire regions became uninhabitable. But before this collapse, global temperatures had been warm for thousands of years, a stable interglacial period ideal for the growth of human networks. This warm age, with its drowned coastlines and forgotten river systems, is where the first civilization may have flourished. Not as a single empire, but as a constellation of connected cultures sharing sky knowledge, maritime skills, and symbolic traditions. When the world cooled again, these networks fractured. Humanity splintered into smaller groups. Tools were lost, techniques forgotten, complexity buried beneath necessity. But the memory and the sky knowledge survived. And when the world warmed again around 12,000 years ago, humanity rebuilt. But this time the rebuilding happened unevenly, rapidly in some regions, slowly in others, influenced by migrations, resources, and sheer chance. The survivors of the earlier world became the ancestors of the cultures we now admire. The megalith builders, the astronomers, the navigators, the priests, the storytellers. Their legacy shows up in the oldest monuments, perhaps not in their stones, but in their alignments with the heavens. It shows up in myths, perhaps not in literal descriptions, but in their underlying patterns of memory. It shows up in genetic lineages stretching tens of thousands of years across continents. And it shows up in the recurring human obsession with cycles of time, stars, creation, destruction, rebirth. If the first civilization existed 97,000 years ago, its greatest gift was not technology. It was perspective. The knowledge that humanity lives in cycles shaped by forces larger than any empire. That memory can survive even when cities do not. That the sky above us is the oldest library ever written, and that everything we call ancient may be only a recent echo of a far older world. In this light, the ruins we marvel at today, Göbekli Tepe, Giza, Teotihuacan, Tiwanaku, Stonehenge, are not the beginning of civilization, but the end of a long forgetting. They are the first monuments built after humanity regained its footing following the last great collapse. They are rekindled flames, not original fires. They are chapters written in stone, using fragments of a far older language. And that means our story, the human story, is not one of linear ascent from primitive to advanced. It is one of remembering and forgetting, of cycles rising and falling, of lessons learned, lost, and learned again, of worlds drowned and worlds reborn. We are not the peak of civilization. We are simply the latest iteration. And as we uncover more ruins, decode more myths, and map more drowned coastlines, we may one day rediscover the full story of the world that existed 97,000 years ago. When we do, it will not rewrite history. It will complete it. Until then, the truth remains buried, not in the ground, but in the patterns linking every ancient culture on Earth. Patterns left by ancestors who lived through catastrophic change, preserved memory in myth, and rebuilt the world from the ashes of a civilization time has tried and failed to erase. The first civilization is not lost. It is waiting to be remembered.